2014 Volvo XC90 Alternator replacement. Required tools: a 1/4 and a 3/8 inch ratchet, 8, 10, and 13 millimeter sockets, a Torx 25 star point, extensions, a few screwdrivers, and a flashlight. So the first thing I did is open the hood, and I've never changed the alternator in this car, so I had to find it, and it looks like it's right down in this area here. So it looks like I'm going to have to remove this intake, and I don't know what else is in my way. But so the first thing I'm going to do is go check the battery again and unplug the battery. I had to use a 13 millimeter wrench to take this bracket off. So then there was a cover that protects the battery. Okay. All right, so now I just want to read the battery and see what kind of voltage I see. I'm getting 12.5 volts, which leads me to think that my battery is good. So, all the same, I'm going to disconnect it, which takes a 10 millimeter All right, battery's disconnected. The very first thing I need to do is pull off this cover, and it just pops off. Just pops straight up. You can see there's little grommets that go into these ball studs. That's what holds this cover in place. So make sure I put the oil cap in. Don't want to get that. So that's the cover. Now, looks like, yeah, the alternator's right down here. So I'm going to remove this guy. It looks like we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 millimeter bolts. Figured out real quick, had to remove this duct, 2 8 millimeter bolts, and then you kind of pull up and snake it out of the pipes. This duct also had to come out, and it's held on with 2 clamps, and the lower one is held, is accessible from the bottom. In order to get to the bottom, you have to remove the lower skid plate that's held on with 5 10mm bolts. The biggest challenge for me was actually disconnecting all the sensor connectors. All of them were different. They all had a different manner of being removed, and so that took more time for me than anything. So what I've done here is I've shown you there are 5 electrical connectors on the intake alone, and then there's another one up on above the intake, and then there is a what looks like a connector for an air hose. But what I've tried to show here is simply where they're located on the intake so that you can be aware and make it easier. I had to find them all. And then the manner in which it took me to get them removed. The one on the bottom, just a tip, you can probably remove it after you get the intake loose and you pull it up a little. For me, I didn't know that at first, and so I tried to remove it with the intake in place. I did get it, and I had to reach it from the bottom. Another tip for sensor connector number 5 and the oxygen line, they're connected to the intake with a rubber isolator, and you can reach in and pull that rubber isolator up and off. And what this will allow you to twist it and get a little bit better access to the oxygen sensor so you can squeeze and get it out of there. The bottom of the intake is held on to the engine with 2 8mm bolts, which is another reason you need to remove the skid plate, because I was only able to access these from under the car. With all of the electrical sensor connectors and oxygen line disconnected from the intake, you can pull that up and pull it out. You may have to clock it clockwise and kind of twist it out. One tip, there is a bracket that's hooked to the side of the intake. If you remove that bracket, all it does is it holds a hose. If you remove that bracket, it kind of helps. Just a note in that these little grommets and this bushing fell out when I removed the intake, and so I had to put them back, and they fell out when I was trying to fit it back in too, so be mindful. While I had the intake out, I went ahead and put a new tie strap in to hold one of the cable assemblies. That just helped so that I wouldn't have to try to squeeze it in after it's in the car. The last 2 electrical connections are on the alternator itself. One is just held on with a 13mm bolt, and then the other one is electrical disconnect that push up and pull that out. The alternator itself is held on with 4 10mm bolts. Fairly easy to get to once everything is out of the way. Once the bolts and the connectors are off, you simply reach down and kind of pry the alternator out of the belt coupler and away from the engine block, and it's out. Here you can see the coupler. They don't call this a belt. It's half on the alternator and half on the engine block, and it's more like of a gear-driven belt. Again, I've never replaced one like this. Alternator coupler. This one looks fine. I'm going to reuse it, and we'll see how it goes. I did see a video out there that talked to this bolt on the engine side and how it's been known in the past to come loose. And so as a precaution, I just wanted to check it and make sure that it was indeed tight. The alternator directly from Volvo is like 600 bucks. I ended up with an AC Delco, and here's the part number. pulled the new alternator out of the box to inspect it and make sure that it was an exact match to my existing alternator, and indeed it was a perfect match. So I'm going to take it out of the wrappers and install it. So here's the new alternator installed. As typical, installation is in reverse order of removal, which should be much smoother for you. I hope this helps someone out there and I'm able to give back to the online community. All the best.